The time has come for the Cobra to rise up and reveal himself.
So, people expect the government to just pour all of this money. This is not even FDR pumping and priming. This is just flooding the economy with money. And so people are going to react and demand higher wages. And this is, as they demand higher wages, this decreases the ability and willingness of businesses to produce, and this will thus decrease aggregate supply, which will be a shift to the left. And as we see, as businesses are decreasing production, they're going to charge more to make more with less, and they're also going to decrease their output as well. As they're decreasing production, they are naturally going to decrease output and raise prices. Now the tricky part is, how does rational expectations look on the Phillips curve? A shift of aggregate supply. Let's think about what's going on here. Here we have, at this point, we have GDP and prices are now decreasing and increasing. So let's say we are here. Let's say we are at point A, just again choosing arbitrary numbers on the axes. How do we show both an increase in inflation and an increase in unemployment? We have to shift SRPC to the right. It's SRPC 1. And this shows that at our same point A, let's say if this is a new curve, when we draw an arrow, this means we have a new curve. So at all original points, let's take at this point A, because of rational expectations, people expecting prices to increase, they're demanding higher wages. We now have, at all original points, we have higher prices and a decrease in output means an increase in unemployment. Higher unemployment. So, shifts in aggregate supply are opposite shifts in SRPC. So a shift to the left in AS, like through rational expectations, would be a shift to the right in SRPC. Also, a shift to the right in aggregate supply, like for supply side economics, so let's take a look at that, or for a decrease in input costs. And this is the other interesting aspect of the Phillips curve. It also gives a lot of credence to supply side economics and also shows, well, what happens, how an economy does go back to normal on its own. Remember, supply side economics is focusing on the ability and willingness of businesses to produce, positively affecting the factor market. And so supply side economics shows that if you increase businesses' ability and willingness to produce, and that is not Keynesian policy, and it is another economic theory. It is sometimes tested on the AP test, right, as another economic theory. And as you notice in our, whichever book you are using, that, it does, either the Barron's or the Princeton, like it does appear sprinkled throughout the book, supply side economics. And that really just is the government focusing policies on increasing businesses' ability and willingness to produce by either decreasing input costs, decreasing regulations. Again, not the answer on the AP test. After high school, if you want to believe it, there's many different, if you think this is a good idea, there are many different schools of economic thought that, are potentially, your right answer on, in life and in politics and economics. On the AP test, though, it's only our founder, John Maynard Keynes. But you still have to know supply side economics. And this is a good time to really flesh it out. So it is about increasing the ability and willingness to produce. And as businesses have an increased ability and willingness to produce, they can produce more for less. And so we see that prices come down and GDP increases. And this is why many economists are supply-siders, right? As we've seen through the course, there's good things about Keynes, there's bad things about Keynes. There's good things about this, there's bad things about this. So there's always two sides, as Phillips shows, there's always a trade-off in economic theory. But an increase in aggregate supply, just like when we see an economy going back to normal, from recession to full employment, where businesses, where input costs decrease as people accept lower wages. Same thing, aggregate supply is increasing. This would be a shift to the left of the Phillips curve. Showing that our original point, as well as SRPC2, showing that our original point A, we'll call this A2, we now have lower inflation and lower unemployment. And the other main takeaway is that shifts to aggregate supply happen as opposite shifts to the Phillips curve, because this shows that at any previous point there is both either an increase in inflation and unemployment or a decrease in inflation and unemployment at the same time. Now let's take a look at, for our last part of the Phillips curve, let's take a look at the long-run Phillips curve. And the long-run Phillips curve is going to serve the same point as the LRAS, showing the visualization of where we are versus where we should be. So here we have the LRPC, the long-run Phillips curve, which is really just like the PPC and the LRAS. It is where we are in relation to where we should be. But the LRPC, because for the first time now we actually have the parameter of the unemployment rate as an axis, the LRPC fully represents the natural rate of unemployment. That unemployment, there is no cyclical, but structural and frictional does exist, but there is no cyclical. That the economy is truly where we should be. And that where we should be is represented by LRPC being a vertical line. That verticalness shows us several things, just like the verticalness of the LRAS shows us that. So the LRPC and the LRAS and the PPC are all the same things, just for different sets of visualizations. So the verticalness shows us, one, it is where we should be. It is where we should be because resources are constant and they are fully employed. We would not be at the natural rate of unemployment if resources were not fully employed. And remember, full employment does not equal 0% unemployment, it equals the natural rate of unemployment. It is because we are where we should be and we have full employment of resources, the LRPC is not affected by price level. We see that unemployment, and sometimes the test will say label an LRPC a natural rate of unemployment at 4%. If they ask you to do that, then you just put the 4% or whatever number they tell you to do right here on the bottom with the unemployment rate. And we see here that no matter the inflation rate, unemployment remains the same. That is because resources are fully employed. So it is unaffected by prices in the short run. And it can only shift. LRPC can only change if, just like the LRAS and the PPC, there is a long-term or permanent change to the quality or Q of Q, of resources and technology. But just be aware that it is the opposite direction of LRAS, because a shift to the left will show a permanent decrease in the natural rate of unemployment, which would be a good thing, because that means that something very, very positive happened industrially in a nation, and the natural rate of unemployment is now permanently lower, versus if something bad industrially happened to our resources and our technology, that would be a shift to the right, showing that there was an increase in the permanent unemployment, natural rate of unemployment. And so for an AP test, just like in the full employment graph, we could also show where we are versus where we should be, and the effects of fiscal policy. We could do that here too. Sometimes a question might say, on a Phillips curve, label recession as point R. And so if we were to do that, we would put that point R right over here, because we are in a recession, because unemployment, if we were to draw a line down to, let's say, 7%, it might not ask you to do that, but just as a visualization, right, we're using an axis, so we're going 0 and upwards. So let's say this is 7%. Unemployment, we are above where we should be. Then the question might say, assume that there is a expansionary fiscal policy. How would that be illustrated on the long and short run Phillips curve? That would be a shift to the right of aggregate demand, or it would be a movement to the left, as we saw previously, on the Phillips curve. And it might say label that point B. And you would label it on the LRPC, because the goal of a proper Keynesian fiscal policy is to take us from recession, where we are, to where we should be. And then if it asks you any questions about how does the economy return to normal on its own from recession, that would be a shift to the left of the Phillips curve, because that would be a shift to the right of aggregate supply. That businesses expect input costs that people in a recession, unemployment is high, people eventually accept lower wages. This lowers the input cost, which shifts aggregate supply to the right, or shifts SRPC to the left. So everything you could show on the full employment graph in terms of where we are versus where we should be, and the effects of policies on where we are versus where we should be, you can show on the Phillips curve. But it just happens in a bit of a mirror image. And if you go and play back the full employment lessons in reverse, it's actually me talking about the Phillips curve. So, thank you for watching. This has been A.W. Phillips, and the trade-off, both the trade-off of fiscal policy and the visualization of proper fiscal policy. Remember, whether it is your money, your mind, or your body, invest hard, invest often, and no feelings. And remember, money never sleeps.